Ever since I found out about the Game Boy Advance Consoleizer, I've been intrigued by the idea of taking a handheld console and making it playable on a monitor or TV. I think my number one pick for a consoleized handheld would have to be the 3DS. This handheld has so many great games and the graphics are really awesome. It's just begging to be played on a big monitor or TV. Now, unfortunately, there's no consoleizer for the 3DS, but there have been a few capture mods for it. A capture mod is a mod that you install inside the 3DS, and it usually lets you connect through a USB cable to your computer. You run a program on your computer that allows you to display one of the screens from the 3DS. Then you can use a program like OBS to record that footage or even stream it. Capture mods for the 3DS are kind of hard to find inexpensively, and sometimes the only way to get a capture mod is to send your 3DS to a company, they mod it for you, and then they ship it back. Now, if you're new here, let me just tell you that that's not how I like to do things. I like to install my own mods in my own consoles, and that's where this mod comes in. This 3DS capture mod is from a Japanese company called Optimize, and I'm gonna install this in my 3DS. Let's jump over to the bench and I'll show you how to do it. I'm gonna be following the instructions available on the Optimize website. They're in Japanese, but there's a lot of pictures and Google Translate does a pretty good job. The first step is actually to open the 3DS, and I'm gonna follow the iFixit tutorial about opening the 3DS case. Let's flip it over, and we're gonna unscrew these 4 screws on the back here. Now we should be able to lift this whole back piece off. Let's go ahead and take the battery out. Now we're going to unscrew all of these recessed screws around the case. And now with all those screws removed, we should be able to just lift this case off. Oops, I forgot to screw up here by the cartridge slot. Now maybe it'll come off. We've got to be really careful because there's this really small flex cable right here. But the only thing we have to do to release this flex cable is to lift up on this little tab thing right here. And then we can put this aside. Our next goal is to remove the motherboard from the case here. And it looks like we need to remove some of the flex cables from around the board. I'm just gonna kind of work my way around the board and see if we can try to get this board out. For this little flex cable here, it looks like we can just raise this white part up. And then this cable can come out. And then we're just gonna put that white part down again. Also, we can remove this IR board right here. We should be able to just easily pick it off. Yep, it has another one of those connectors that kind of just pushes down on the board. Next, let's try to remove the SD card reader. I think there's 2 more screws here we need to remove. The Optimize instructions give us a helpful hint that if we take a big flathead screwdriver and put it beneath the little board here and the shield that's underneath, we should be able to break the glue that separates this board from that shield. And now we can disconnect the connector here. It's another one of those push style connectors. And put that aside. I think we need to disconnect the circle pad here too, so I'm gonna unscrew that as well. And now to remove this flex cable here, we're gonna have to lift up on this little connector again from the side that's facing the directional pad. And then we should be able to remove that cable. And we'll close that again. I think everything is disconnected here. Let's go ahead and unscrew these screws on this side to remove the board. Looks like there's one more connector up here. Let's go ahead and lift this flap up and remove that flex cable and put that flap back down. And there's a few more screws on this side. I'm gonna turn around this way, and I'm gonna try to lift the board out of here. Oops, it looks like I forgot to disconnect the screen here, so let's go ahead and do that. Mine had a little piece of white tape, and then disconnect this connector, and pull the flex cable out, and then put that flex cable connector down. It actually looks like there's another one over here, so let's do that one as well. We need to remove this Wi-Fi board as well. That's another one of those push connectors. There's still one more connector down here. There's another connector up here. And we can remove that one too. And now we finally have the board out. Long story short, basically disconnect everything. Let's put the other part of this case aside. We might as well remove this slider connector here. I think it just pops straight out of this socket. Just like that. Now before we solder the flex cable on the mod here, we have to cut a notch in the flex cable up here. So we're just gonna cut a little bit up here and then down here until we get to the line that's at a 45-degree angle, because we're gonna be bending this cable like this later on. To help us line the mod up when we're soldering, I'm gonna put a piece of Captain tape right up here and another one over here. I'm gonna do my best to line up the holes on the flex cable here to all the test points on the board. I can kind of look down here in the corner and see a bunch of test points, so that's where I'm gonna start to line up the flex cable. And when they're lined up across the flex cable, go ahead and stick the Captain tape down. Now we just need to start soldering these test points, and I'm gonna start up here. Now I'm gonna use plenty of flux, and what I'm gonna do is put a little bit of solder on one of these test points, and then I'm actually gonna push down with my finger around the edge. I wanna get the flex cable as flat down to the board as I possibly can. Once you have one, just take a look at the rest of the test points and make sure that they're still lined up. I think I'm okay to move on to more test points. Don't be afraid to add more flux. Now the optimized guide says to run your finger over these joints after they're done, and if you can feel a little spike or a raised bump, try to get them a little bit flatter. Add a little bit more flux, and try to pull the solder off with your iron. Okay, this part looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and continue to work my way down the flex cable. And just remember not to solder any of the parts of this little flex cable yet. Okay, once all these parts are soldered and you made sure that there aren't any bumps on the solder joints, go ahead and fold this little piece of the flex cable over on that dotted line, and then solder these test points as well. At this point, you can take off the Captain tape, but mine kind of fell off already. Next, we have to solder some wires to these two pads on the flex cable here. So let's go ahead and tin them up. And the two places those wires are gonna go are to this test point 5 and the left side of this capacitor up here. The kit comes with this really thin wire, and that's what we're going to use to solder to those pads. In order to tin this wire, the optimized guide says that you can just heat it up with your soldering iron with solder on it. So first we're gonna get a bunch of solder on my iron, and then we're gonna try to hold the iron on the end of the wire. That seemed to work pretty good, and now this wire is tinned. So let's solder that tinned end to that capacitor. And then we're gonna follow it over to this top point and then cut it to length. And then we can tin the other end. And then we can solder it to that pad. Just keep in mind that we want this wire as flat as possible. And now we're just gonna repeat the same steps for this bottom wire here. Okay, that's all for the soldering. Let's go ahead and prepare this board to go back into the case. This mod is gonna actually wrap around the other side, so we're gonna have to kind of bend it around so that it goes underneath here. And then we're gonna kind of fold at this white line right there around to the other side. Since we're gonna be moving this board around a lot, I'm gonna just tape the mod down temporarily with some more Captain tape, just so that we don't damage the flex cable at all. We're basically just gonna do the opposite of what we did to take the 3DS apart to put it back in the shell.
2 hours later.
Okay, I managed to get all the flex cables in. That was pretty challenging, so just go slow and take your time. I'm up to the point where I can reinstall the screws here. We have to put this black piece under here, and then the screws, and then the 4 silver screws over here. And then we can reinstall the actual SD card piece. Just kind of put it under the mod temporarily. And now I'm gonna flip the mod over like this, so kind of bend it up a little bit and then rotate it around this way and reattach the SD card cable and press down on that connector. And now we can work on the little circle pad thing. We're gonna try to feed this little tiny flex cable through the hole in the mod flex cable. Now we're gonna have to take the circle pad flex cable and attach it into the connector that's underneath it. Okay, and now we can screw the circle pad down. And we can reinstall this little board back here. After everything is installed and screwed down, the only thing left to do is cut the case so that this mini USB port can kind of stick out the side here. We're gonna be cutting a small piece here, and then we're gonna be cutting a big piece out of the bottom part of the 3DS. First thing, you wanna line up this hole in the mod with the little screw peg underneath it. That's where the mod is gonna sit when the case is put all back together. Now we're just gonna need to cut a little bit of the case on either side of the USB here. This is kind of hard to line up, but I'm gonna try to put a dot here and there. Now I'll move the mod out of the way, and I'm gonna cut out a piece of the top of the plastic there between those 2 lines that I made. I'm gonna use the nippers that I used for when I did Gundam models. And with some chunks taken out of the left and the right side there, I'm gonna try to use my X-Acto knife to flatten the middle. Now let's just do another test fit to see if that USB port will fit in there. I think I actually have to make mine wider on both sides. I think that should work. With this part of the case modified, the last thing we have to do is modify the bottom of the case. In a nutshell, we have to cut part of this bottom case so that the mod itself is actually gonna stick through this case. I'm gonna use a Dremel to cut my case, but first I'm gonna draw an outline on the bottom here of where I'm gonna cut. Before I do that though, I have to take the stylus out and this black stylus holder piece out. With those screws removed, we can go ahead and take this black piece out, as well as the SD card cover. We're gonna need to cut these pieces too, but we can do that after we cut the bottom shell. Let's flip the bottom shell over, and I'm gonna draw an outline of what we're gonna have to cut out on this shell. I'm gonna start drawing on the bottom right corner of this symbol right here, and I'm gonna go all the way down into the middle of that hole right there. And from the bottom of the hole, we're gonna go over to in between these circles here, and then go straight down to the bottom of the shell. Then we're gonna go over to this already cut part out of the shell right there. Next, we're gonna draw a straight line from about here down to that cut part of the shell, and finally, we're gonna go straight over to that line we just drew. I'm gonna go cut this piece out with my Dremel, and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. Okay, I've made a few cuts with my Dremel. Let's go ahead and use the side cutters to finish it off. This is still pretty rough right now, but if we take the bottom of the case and get the mod lined up, we can see that this is going to fit right over the mod, and we can find any parts that we still need to cut out for this to stick out. I'm gonna go back to the Dremel and cut a bit more on this right side here. That's a little bit better, but I might have to go even more. Something to note, there's a little screw hole right down here. Not this big one here, because we're gonna use that to mount the mod, but there's a little tiny screw hole right there that we're gonna have to cut flat. While we're here, we're also gonna have to cut a hole for the USB port. I'm gonna put the mod on that screw hole right there and put some lines here. And I'm gonna use the Dremel to cut out that piece of plastic. I'm also gonna cut this SD card piece from this screw hole here up this way at a 45-degree angle, basically separating this top piece from the bottom piece down here. And down here, I'm gonna have to cut this part straight across right there, down here. So I'm just gonna cut this section out and be left with this left side here and the part where the stylus goes in. I'm also gonna cut the SD card cover, and that is just gonna go straight through the existing line right here, so that I'm only left with this piece. With this piece cut out, let's go ahead and screw these other pieces in. We'll screw the cut stylus piece in back here. And then the SD card door. And now we can finally put everything back together. Let's reattach the flex cables for the L and R buttons. And then we can sort of try to put everything together. Stick the mod in that screw hole. Then we can screw the back onto the 3DS. And let's reinstall the battery. And put the back cover on. And that's everything put back together. The USB port here in the bottom does look a little off center, but I think that should be okay. I just want to get the 3DS booted up and see if it's working fine. One more test is to see if the stylus fits in there correctly. And it seems like it does. First things first, let's go ahead and see if this Animal Crossing game works. The first time I tried to power the system on, it wouldn't do anything for about 3 seconds, and then it made a popping noise, and then the LED underneath here went off. I fixed it by taking the back shell off, taking the Wi-Fi module out, and reattaching the antenna on the back of it, and then reseating it. And then after I buttoned everything up again, I was able to get the system to turn on, but it's only the lower screen. So something is up with the top screen up here. I think it has something to do with the ribbon cables for the top screen. Check it out, now everything's working. I had disassembled it all the way down to those LCD flex cables that are in the corner, and all I did was disconnect basically everything down to the board removal and then reconnect all of the flex cables again. Now the top screen is working and all the buttons are working, as well as the camera and all of the original functionality. Now let's go ahead and connect this 3DS to our computer using a mini USB cable and see what added functionality this capture mod gives us. Let's install the software that we're going to need to use the capture mod with the computer. Here in the mod installation instructions, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a link to download the viewer software from the non-standard website. It's kind of funny, but I think non-standard is actually the brand. Here on the non-standard website, if we go to this blog post here, we can see some links to download the software. What we're gonna need is this N3DS View software, and I download the latest version right here. After we extract the zip file and go into the folder, we're gonna go into this driver folder and install this driver. I already installed it, so it says ready to use. Now we go back into N3DS View folder, and we're gonna open the N3DS View app. Now, when you first open this program, you might see something about not having a serial key. We're gonna go to File here and change product key. And this is where you're gonna put the product key that's on the piece of paper that comes with the mod when you buy it. All right, now the only thing we have to do is turn on the 3DS and plug in that USB cable. Now this viewer is gonna show whatever is displayed on your 3DS. Let's go ahead and make this full screen, and let's go through a couple of the options in this program. I don't really care about anything on these first couple of tabs. I'm gonna go right to filtering, and I've already actually set mine to no filter, but you can turn on a bilinear filter as well as an anisotropic filter, but I like mine better at no filter. This size adjust menu will actually change the video view size here to a multiple of the screen size. Under display, we can do things like only show the top screen, switch back to that showing both the upper and lower screen. add some screen spacing here, or even put the screens side by side. You can change the ratio that the upper and lower screens take up, or you can even rotate them, I guess, if you're playing on a vertical monitor. That's pretty interesting. Personally, I like setting this to only the upper display and then going full screen here. This is going to show one big version of whatever's on the top screen. I thought I wasn't really going to like this mod that much. I don't really see a need for myself needing a capture card for the 3DS. I would much rather have a consolizer for it, but in this case it actually makes a lot of sense because you're still using the controls from a 3DS, but you're just seeing what's on the top screen on your computer. I think this makes a lot of sense if you're a streamer and you want to stream the 3DS catalog. This is a great way to do that. With that being said, this is still a pretty difficult mod. I'm a pretty experienced modder, but just the fact of having to take the entire 3DS apart multiple times is a little tedious, on top of the fact that you have to do some soldering. So if taking apart one of the most complicated systems I've ever taken apart multiple times and soldering inside of it doesn't bother you, then I think this is a pretty cool challenging mod to do. The other thing is there are only versions of this mod available for a few of the 3DS models. I have the regular original version of the 3DS, and I do believe that they have a version for the new 3DS XL, but they don't have a version for any of the 2D consoles or the normal sized new 3DS. Thanks for watching this video on how to install the optimized 3DS capture mod. If this video helped you out, please leave a like, and if you're interested in the latest and greatest console mods, then get subscribed so you don't miss one of my install videos. I'll see you in the next video.